Hello and welcome to Makeshift Stories. Thank you for listening. You can help us out by telling your friends about us and getting them to subscribe on Apple Podcasts. Now, open your imagination and take a journey into the improbable as you listen to Makeshift Stories 175, Ken Likeley, Accidental Interdimensional Drifter, in Deepfake, read by Mitchell Tew. Ken was the only person on the bus, other than the driver, who had no choice in the matter, but given one, would have been anywhere else. So, not counting the driver, Ken, and the bus, there was mostly nothing else, except for a small, rectangular piece of paper, unnoticed except by the bus, because it had just materialized the thing out of thin air. The bus had a few extra abilities, such as manipulating changes in the quantum state of the universe, which came in handy in tests such as today. Like the bus driver, the piece of paper didn't really want to be there, and hadn't been consulted or given any advance notice of the role it was about to play. Nor had it been given any choice in the blue color of the ink, which had been used to print some words and numbers on it in reversed letters. It thought the reversed printing was a silly oversight, but figured the bus and driver knew what they were doing, so it didn't point out the mistake, and just did its assigned role, and lay there on the floor in the aisle, determined this would be the last time. It really needed to find a new line of work. If you had the foresight to bring a hand mirror and use it to look at a reflection of the paper, you would realize it was a perfectly printed transit pass. Perfect in every detail, if you ignored that it was printed in reverse. Ken pulled the cord to get off the bus. As he got up, he noticed a small piece of paper lying in the aisle. If there was one thing Ken hated more than an improperly completed form, it was littering. He suspected both were perpetrated by the same kind of person, the kind of person who was in too much of a hurry, too self-focused to notice small but important things. Important things like checking off the privacy acknowledgement box at the bottom of a form so Ken could process it, or looking for the inconveniently located trash can instead of treating the entire world like a personal garbage dump. Disgusted, Ken bent down and picked up the small piece of paper. He was about to crumple it when he noticed the backward writing, saw the thing's reflection in the window out of the corner of his eye, realized it was a transit pass, and decided it was turning out to be a good day after all. It was going to be good despite the 5 forms he hadn't been able to process, because none of the filler-outers bothered checking the privacy acknowledgement box, and one of them had obviously been on the bus, littering. Ken got off at his stop looking forward to the rest of his day. The bus drove away, relieved the trigger it had willed into existence had been removed by the right person. Sensing it was a job well done, the bus and the driver agreed to flip the sign to out of service, then vanished while no one was looking, so they could get on with more important things. The sun was shining as Ken walked home, despite the weather forecast which had called for rain. As he turned the corner to his street, he noticed something odd. His block looked right for once. It looked like a photo he had seen on the cover of Better Homes and Gardens. Everything was perfect, but perfect in that creepy kind of way. The creepy way a photoshopped picture of a celebrity who appears to be 10 years younger than they actually are looks. In particular, his neighbor's place, which had been owned since before Ken could count his toes, by Leaf Basil, looked, well, like a photo from Architectural Digest. Oddly, although Ken generally tried not to think of such things, as it wasn't polite to pry into the life of a neighbor, Leaf looked today the same way he did 40 years ago. There was also Leaf's dog, Planet. Ken couldn't remember Leaf without the dog, which made Planet how old? Ken knew Photoshop couldn't account for that. It hadn't been around long enough. While he was trying not to think about this, Planet was suddenly in front of him, blocking his way.
Hey, Kenny dude! Good day working for the establishment?
Leaf? Ken did his best to ignore the fact the distinct idiom had come from the dog and spun around expecting to find Leaf standing behind him. But the old hippie wasn't there, wasn't anywhere he could see. There was, however, a distinguished-looking man of indeterminate age, standing in the middle of Leaf's yard, examining the grass in great detail. He appeared to be perplexed by what he was seeing.
I'm over here, dude. You look stressed, man. I've got some good, all-natural remedies for that. They'll keep you chill all day.
Planet barked at him. Bewildered, Ken spun around to face the dog and noticed she was wearing beads around her neck with a gold peace sign medallion dangling where a dog tag should have been.
What's the matter, Kenny? You seem sorta freaked out, man. I take it work wasn't a blast?
Leaf, you're a dog.
Hey, man, that's uncalled for. It's like me calling you a sheep or a monkey or something. I was just welcoming you home, dude. No need to go all ape on me.
The Leaf, who looked like Planet, turned and trotted away, calling to the man in his front yard, who was now down on his hands and knees, prodding at the perfectly manicured lawn.
Hey, Planet, let's go for a walk. Kenny there is on some kind of bum trip today. Better give him some space so he can get it together.
But, haven't you noticed, that you're a dog? Ken exclaimed, getting a bit flustered.
I get it, dude. You go and chill. We'll jaw later.
With that, Planet, or Leaf, or whatever Ken was thinking he was seeing, scampered over to the neatly dressed man, crawling around on the lawn, and began to talk to him in a low voice so Ken couldn't hear. Ken did a double take as the strange man looked, smiled, and waved. If you cut the hair, lost the beard, and generally applied a modern look to his neighbor, Leaf would have looked just like the man who had smiled at him. Then Ken's head began to ache really, really badly. The neo-mammalian part of Ken's brain decided to ignore the information about the outside world it was being fed by the neocortex. Blaming the weird scene it had just been asked to deal with on low sugar levels, it directed Ken's legs to take him home to eat. After a hearty meal of ribs, smothered in sweet barbecue sauce and ketchup, it would try and process the scene again. In the meantime, it did its best to ignore anomalous details, but the final blow to its sense of reality came when Ken opened the freezer compartment to retrieve a package of family-sized, boneless rib-shaped pork patties with extra sauce, only to discover hand-labeled Ziploc bags of frozen, organically grown vegetables. Fortunately, Ken's lizard brain kicked into action, directing its more intelligent host to dial the closest pizza place for home delivery and order a meat lover's special with extra cheese, cheese sticks, and pop. Not too much later, as Ken emptied the last can of cherry pop and downed the last greasy cheese stick, he began to recover, chalking everything he had experienced since getting off the bus up to hypoglycemia-induced confusion and anxiety. The room around him at the moment looked sort of normal. The detritus of 2 recently emptied pizza boxes, pop cans, and crumpled grease-stained paper napkins strewn across the table made Ken relax with its familiarity. But something caught his eye, something very out of place. Ken swiveled his head to stare at the bookshelves, which held his collection of 1970s sci-fi collectibles. Somewhere between the authentic signed Jupiter II and the Space 1999 1:16 scale Eagle, Ken thought he had seen something blink, but nothing was there. Thinking his sugar-boosted perceptions were possibly not quite up to full strength and were going to mess with him until he had another can of pop, Ken began to turn his head away. When the bookshelf was almost out of view, he saw it. 2 large yellow eyes with tiny round pupils. He tried to look directly at them. They disappeared. Experimenting, Ken ignored the spot, then suddenly glanced back, but again, nothing was there. Ken tried slowly turning away, keeping the problematic spot in the corner of his vision. This time, the eyes appeared, accompanied by a toothy, disembodied smile which popped out of existence when he focused on it.
It's seeing something. Look, it's staring this way. It's not supposed to be able to do that. I told you the leg would be a problem. Compensate!
Befuddled and sounding just a little put upon, The words simply manifested somewhere near where Ken had seen the disembodied smile. "Leaf, is that you? Are you trying to convince me to change my diet again? How did you get in here anyway?"
What's a leaf? There's no leaf in the test plan.
"Leaf is my annoying neighbor," Ken explained nervously.
It's hearing us.
With a small pop, the voice, eyes, and smile disappeared, leaving an almost invisible smear in the air next to Ken's $6 Million Man lunchbox set, still in its original packaging, which looked a bit melted until the smear finally erased itself. "Leaf?" Ken demanded again, ignoring that correlation does not always imply causation. But he was 100% certain when something weird happened, his vegan, hippie neighbor was at the vortex. It was an easy but misleading conclusion to come to when you assumed you were the most rational and ordinary person in existence. However, the universe understood things from a slightly broader perspective and knew with equal certainty the attractor of all things strange was, in fact, Ken. In abject ignorance and filled with self-righteousness, Ken stomped across the front yard to his neighbor's suspiciously neat and over-manicured house. He rang the doorbell with as much intensity and outrage as he could put behind a button press. But nothing happened. Ken increased the pressure on the doorbell, then heard the muffled chime on the other side of the door, which, not surprisingly, was the first few bars of "Break On Through."
Not good. It's consulting the other two,
a muffled voice somewhere behind Ken complained. As he swung quickly around to see where the voice had come from, the world briefly took on 2 or 3 different appearances. Ken felt nauseous, like the time he had turned his head too fast in a VR game rig at the Macroware store in the mall.
Ken?
The door opened behind him. He spun back, and for an instant, Leaf's face was slightly off-center and way too low, exposing flax-colored fur on his neighbor's neck and forehead. Ken blinked.
"Ken?"
the leaf thing asked again. "Come on in. You look ill."
"I'll get Leaf. He'll know what to do."
But before Ken could complete the thought, the rational world appeared to take a lunch break and glitched. The leaf, who did not sound like Leaf, stared slack-jawed over Ken's shoulder. "Leaf, you need to see this," the Leaf lookalike yelled, and got annoyed when there wasn't an immediate response. "Leaf, come here!" Finally, the light ticking of nails on the hall floor announced the appearance of what Ken would, on most days, have considered to be Planet. On most days, he also suspected Planet was the real decision-maker of the duo. However, today, with the world sort of glitching, the voices from nowhere, and the disembodied floating eyes, Ken wasn't quite completely thrown by the discontinuity of Planet sounding like Leaf, or the fact that Planet talked at all. Maybe it was the new tea he had bought from a pop-up store at noon. Yes, he knew he shouldn't buy stuff to ingest from a possibly non-licensed vendor, but the salesperson had been very convincing, and Ken occasionally liked to live on the edge. Yes, Ken decided the unlabeled teabag must have been more than rose hips. Yes, that had to be it. The very convincing salesperson did claim he would view the world differently after a few cups. Ken decided he just needed to wait until the tea ran through his system. So, he decided to ignore the fact Planet was talking like Leaf, that there were disembodied voices emanating from smiles hanging in midair, and the world appeared to be acting like a stumbling drunk.
"This ain't cool. Not copacetic at all,"
Planet yipped in Leaf's voice, large, brown eyes excitedly darting around.
"It's the edges, man. They're all so wasted, so psychedelic, like things are a freaking movie made by a plastic Mr. Natural on a bad trip."
"Leaf?"
"Yeah, that's my name, man. Don't wear it out."
I'm not going to say this again. Just look in the mirror," Ken suggested, pointing at a long mirror near the front door, in a Danish, modern wood frame. The last time he had been over, the mirror had been mounted in something a tad more decorative. More like something which had been found in a backstreet Hay-Ashbury market in 1967. But silently, as mirrors tend to do, it thought it looked quite smart in the Danish modern Deepfake and decided to take the matter up with Leaf when all the looking and oh my, something's not right had finished. In fact, what was wrong was obvious to the mirror, so it didn't understand why everyone staring into it was so surprised. The Leaf, who sounded like Planet, interrogated the reflection, shaking its head quickly, causing its face to lag slightly behind the movement, like a cheap special effect. You're right, Leaf. You can see it at the edge of your vision when you turn your head. It's not the best. Quite sloppy work, really. Quite amateurish. It didn't even fool Ken. That's why you came over, right? Ken nodded.
Amateurish? It's only in beta!
The indignant words appeared to come from nowhere. Then, for a millisecond, a toothy chagrin floated in front of all three from a place where the air had become pixelated.
Fix it!
The chagrin demanded, then vanished.
A Cheshire cat!
The Planet Leaf lookalike growled in disgust.
I don't think so, Planet. Those things are all Alice in Wonderland-like. But there's some kind of freaky trip being laid on us here.
The Leaf Planet lookalike dog bared its teeth.
When did this start happening, Kenny dude?
Ken stuttered. I guess it was after I found that lost transit pass on the bus coming home. I thought it was just random litter, and you know how I hate that kind of stuff. But when I picked it up, I realized it was a pass. The odd thing was it had been printed backwards, and come to think of it, the bus was kind of weird too. It came before my normal one. I thought it was an overflow or something. I'd never seen the driver before.
Okay, man, you gotta get back on that bus, dude, and lose the pass. It's the ticket to the freakiness that's going down. Go, Kenny dude. Lay that thing on the driver, man. It's the only way.
Ken was a bit dazed and confused, but that was the way he always felt after talking to Leaf and Planet, deciding he didn't have a better idea and wanting to get the original contents of his fridge back. Ken headed for the bus stop. The paper bus pass was beginning to regret allowing itself to be found by the uptight guy whose pocket it was now jammed into. The guy was sweating, and the clamminess was starting to literally wilt the nice, crisp card-weight paper stock it had been printed on, and although it didn't really care for the color choice of the ink, if this kept up, the ink would start running. So, it was looking for any opportunity to get out of the current situation when it felt the superposition of the universe suddenly change. Sensing quantum changes was an ability the bus had accidentally given it, an ability for which the piece of paper had absolutely no use. The bus, nor its driver, was especially happy about having to go back. They both hated hiccups, especially like today, when things weren't turning out as well as they had planned. So, both were resigned to just getting it done as they pulled up to the suburban stop where they had dropped their subject off earlier that afternoon. The guy was standing there, sweating nervously, fingering the bus pass, making it a tad soggy looking. Hating touching sweat-soaked tickets, the driver put on her gloves before opening the door. Ken watched as the bus's bifold door jerked back, revealing stairs and a driver who didn't really want to be there any more than he did. Ken nervously presented the pass to the driver, who took it in a latex-covered hand, like she was handling a dangerous artifact from a chemical plant explosion. The driver turned it over several times, examining the thing.
It's a mistake. It's printed backwards,
she said incredulously, shaking her head, then yelled to the empty bus.
How did you miss this?
They can't expect perfection for what they're paying us, the bus complained. Hey, Ken began to object, but suddenly found himself standing outside on the curb. You sound the same as that. However, before he could complete his sentence, he realized he was speaking to empty air. Makeshift Stories is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, powered by ATB Financial. To listen to other great APN award-winning podcasts such as The Read Along, a mini book club for your ears, please head over to albertapodcastnetwork.com. Now, a word from our sponsor, ATB. Christina is a foodie with a passion for healthy, vegan food. With a business plan in mind for a health-conscious eatery, she reached out to ATB. After being introduced to a manager of entrepreneurship, she was happy to find he not only supported her dream, but was excited about it too. Now, Christina has 2 successful KB & Co. restaurant locations in Edmonton, Alberta, serving delicious, plant-based food to vegans and non-vegans alike. To get inspired by Christina's story, visit atb.com/Christina. Makeshift Stories is released twice a month around the 1st and the 15th. This month's story was written by Alan V. Hare and read by Mitchell Tew. Opening and closing theme, Magical Mystery by 8th Mode Music, is licensed from Audio Juggle on a Music Mass reproduction license. If you'd like to connect with us, please send an email to makeshiftstories@gmail.com or visit our website at makeshiftstories.com. Links to both are in the show notes. You can help us out by subscribing on Apple Podcasts or any of your favorite podcast services. Makeshift Stories is released under a Creative Commons non-commercial attribution, no derivative license, which means you are free to share our stories. Just remember to credit us and don't alter anything.